In fact, somebody took the book and defecated upon it. You know, politicians kind of were using the book and just the phrase Heather has two mommies to show the decline of Western civilization as we know it.
There was a website that called me the Antichrist, but it's kind of interesting to be called the Antichrist. One doesn't quite know how to respond to that.
3 to 8-year-olds, my colleagues, in your school districts, this book can be purchased with taxpayer dollars. You might want to check, find out.
In the beginning, there was an explosion that filled an impossible void. And then there were planets that defined something from the nothingness. Then came life. First minute, then large and cumbersome, and then man. And man had to learn to survive, to make fire, to find purpose in existence itself. And once all that was sorted out, man learned to get annoyed about stuff. So this is a podcast about some controversies. Not the big political controversies, not corporate espionage or fraud. No, none of that. Controversies you may not even have known happened, or how weird they were. So join Andy Smith on a 5-part miniseries delving into little controversies in different aspects of our media. In this episode, we look at literature, specifically literature for younger people. What could be more easygoing than that? No one could be upset by kids' books, right? We all have memories of books we read in childhood. We all can probably think of a controversial book or two we've read, or at least heard about. But you probably have not got one book that fits both categories. Controversy in literature is nothing new. Way back in 212 BC, Chinese Emperor Shi Huangdi ordered the burning of all books, so that all history would begin with him. In the year 35, Caligula tried to ban Homer's Odyssey as he objected so much to its message of freedom. Galileo's works, his theories about our solar system, so angered the Catholic Church they threw him in jail and coerced a rejection out of him of everything that he had written. So history is littered with reviled books. And more modern, more enlightened times really haven't changed much.
Would you approve of your young sons, young daughters, because girls can read as well as boys, reading this book?
In 1960, Penguin Books were taken to court under obscenity laws for the publication of Lady Chatterley's Lover, a saucy book that the prosecutors feared would, using the wording of the act, tend to deprave and corrupt persons likely to read it. Prosecutor Mervyn Griffin-Jones, voiced here by an actor, showed himself to be out of touch and out of class when he stated,
"Is it a book that you would have lying around in your own house? Is it a book that you would even wish your wife or your servants to read?"
A year later, in the States, Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, full of sex and swearing and all sorts of good times, was met with a slew of obscenity trials. Having originally been published in France in 1934, it was banned in America for the first 25 years of its literary life. And when it finally hit the shelves stateside, it was not well met. Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Michael Masmano's spleen venting on the book was stern, if slightly rabid, stuff.
Cancer is not a book. It's a cesspool, an open sewer, a pit of putrefaction, a slimy gathering of all that is rotten in the debris of human depravity, and in the centre of all his waste and stench, besmearing himself with its foulest defilement, splashes, leaps, cavorts, and wallows a bifurcated specimen that responds to the name of Henry Miller. One wonders how the human species could have produced so lecherous, blasphemous, disgusting, and immoral a human being as Henry Miller.
And on it goes. Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses was perhaps the most controversial book of modern times, and so angered some Muslims there were book burnings, protests, bans, and even bombings, and author Salman Rushdie was subject to a fatwa.
Since 10 years ago, you are walking, you are running to the hell. I'm your angel, I'm your savior. We are Mustafa Mazeh. We will kill you.
And even worse, some translators of the books were attacked, and some even murdered. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code was hugely successful, but stirred up its fair share of controversy with its proposition that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene were married and had children. The book was made into a film, which sparked yet more protests.
Antichrist. This picture is Antichrist. हम यानी एहतजाज करते हैं, प्रोटेस्ट करते हैं. Where's super powers? Where's UNO? Where's America? Where's UK? Where Christian countries?
And speaking of Jesus, the Bible's had its detractors over the years too. But these are all grown-up books, right? With complicated words and swearing and stuff, so of course they're going to upset some people. But books for younger readers, well, you'd imagine that was safer ground.
Someone stopped me on the street and said, I don't have a book I can read to my daughter that shows a family like ours, so somebody should write one. And by somebody, I knew she meant me. And the reason I took that request very seriously is because I knew from my own experience what it was like to grow up without any type of picture book or TV show or movie that showed a family like mine, meaning a Jewish family.
Lesléa Newman is a writer and lecturer based in Massachusetts, USA. She has written over 70 books for both adults and children in a career spanning over 4 decades. Many of her books have dealt with difficult issues, such as eating disorders, abusive relationships, body image, her Jewish faith, AIDS, lesbianism, and same-sex parenting. And it was that last topic that would see her face a storm of controversy.
I was brought up in the 1950s and 1960s on books like Dick and Jane. And in school, we celebrated Easter and Christmas, and there was never any talk about Jewish holidays. So even though I lived in a Jewish neighborhood, surrounded by families just like my own, I would ask my parents things like, why can't we have a Christmas tree? Why can't I get an Easter bonnet? Because I felt like my family was different, and that meant inferior. And that is very painful to me to think that I thought that from the messages from the media. So as a child, I couldn't do anything to rectify that situation. In fact, I couldn't even articulate that situation. But as an adult, there was something I could do, which was to create a book that showed a little girl with her 2 moms and a happy family, so that kids who are in that type of family could see themselves in a piece of literature, and children who are in different types of families than Heather's could learn more about the world and families that were not like theirs.
And I believe you produced the book and it was not exactly warmly received by publishers, and you had to kind of DIY it, and you were kind of crowdfunding before crowdfunding existed.
That is true. A friend had a desktop publishing business, so she and I decided, she was a lesbian mom with a 2-year-old at the time, so we decided that we would put the book out ourselves, and we actually wrote letters, stuffed envelopes, licked stamps, and sent letters out, and got about $4,000 in $10 donations. And I put in a little more money myself, and we found an illustrator and a printer, and thus Heather was born.
The book was published in 1989, and while it was read and loved by many, it remained under the mainstream radar for its first couple of years.
But the first thing that drew attention to the book was a mention in Newsweek magazine. So, of course, once that happened, everybody knew about the book.
Newsweek staff, 1st of June 1991. Although family has more permutations these days than a poker deal, publishers have balked at bringing out children's titles featuring gay and lesbian parents. But now that there are some 7 million children of such parents, Boston-based Allison Publications, Inc. is filling the gap with the first 2 in a new line of books for and about children of gays. In Daddy's Roommate, intended for 2 to 6-year-olds, Daddy, lover and son play ball, clean house, shop and go to a movie, ball game and zoo. Daddy and lover read, shave and sleep together, behaving as discreetly as any sensitive couple in the presence of a child. Near the end, the son notes that Mummy says Daddy and Frank are gay. And what does that mean? Being gay is just one more kind of love. In Heather Has Two Mommies, for 3 to 8-year-olds, author Lesléa Newman tells a more complicated story. Although tykes are unlikely to understand the pages in which a lesbian gets pregnant through artificial insemination, many can relate to Heather's realisation that, I don't have a daddy. She learns that families come in all sizes and legal statuses. That's a message gay parents are yearning for. New Yorker Wayne Steinman, 40, and his lover of 18 years, adopted a 4-month-old girl 3 years ago. They try to teach her that families like theirs are loving and normal. Says Steinman, these books back up what we say and bring validity to our children's lives.
But many would not agree with Mr. Steinman, and the floodgates opened, as this 1992 New York Times article attests to.
Oregon Measure Asks State to Repress Homosexuality by Timothy Egan, using videos from gay pride marches and a children's book called Heather Has Two Mommies to stir the electorate. A conservative political group has forced a referendum on the strongest anti-homosexual measure ever considered by a state. The proposal, which would classify homosexuality as abnormal, wrong, unnatural and perverse, and allow discrimination against homosexuals in Oregon, is part of a burgeoning backlash against homosexuals, and a theme that has flared in a much less defined way in the presidential campaign. In November, voters in Oregon and Colorado will decide on citizen-initiated measures that would remove legal protection for homosexuals. It would require the state government to actively discourage homosexuality, teaching that it is a moral offence similar to paedophilia, sadism and masochism.
Ballot Measure 9 went to the polls on November 3rd, 1992. The people of Oregon defeated the measure, 828,290 votes to 638,527. In other words, the ballot was defeated by almost 200,000 votes. But this was not the end of the book's negative publicity. It would once again be held up in the hands of a right-wing politician, this time at the Senate itself, on August 1st, 1994.
Texts aimed at 3 to 8-year-olds. Heather has two mommies and daddy's roommate.
Senator Bob Smith.
They both portray the homosexual lifestyle as normal. 3 to 9-year-olds, 3 to 8-year-olds, my colleagues. Heather has two mommies. In your school districts, this book can be purchased with taxpayer dollars. You might want to check, find out if it's there. It can be. The question is, should the taxpayers, the United States taxpayers, without any vote on this, be funding these kinds of programs? I don't think they should, and we're going to have a vote on it.
People were stealing it from libraries or returning it with its pages glued shut, or in one case in a Christian library, in fact, somebody took the bathroom into the book and defecated upon it. And yeah, that's pretty disgusting. And then, politicians kind of were using the book and just the phrase Heather Has Two Mommies to show the decline of Western civilization as we know it. The book was actually read into the congressional record, part of the book. All kinds of things happened. And, it was amazing to me because it's a simple story that bears the message that, quote, the most important thing about a family is that all the people in it love each other. And I, to this day, fail to see what is so controversial about that.
Did it feel groundbreaking when you were making it? Did it feel, there's going to be a backlash here?
I didn't think about anything like that. All I thought about was there is no book like this and there needs to be. So we're going to do what it takes to put it out in the world. I had no idea that it was going to be so controversial because I thought only lesbians would be interested in it. I didn't think anyone else would pay attention.
And Heather Has Two Mommies caused such a splash that it became part of the popular lexicon when discussing gay issues, alternative parenting, and just liberal politics generally.
Right. And their religion is recycling, global warming, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, Heather Has Two Mommies, absolutely appallingly vulgar sex education. Just recently, California, Jerry Brown, it was like 3 weeks ago, signed a law requiring all public schools to, when they teach history, they must teach about the contributions of gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgendered individuals. And I must say, as someone who reads history, liberals are the only people who could make history boring. These modern history textbooks, real history is interesting.
Okay, so for people who are going to grow up with the three parents and want to know where they came from, I've written a short book called Heather Really Has Two Mommies.
That was a C-SPAN interview with Ann Coulter, a right-wing commentator and writer, and a segment from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. Lesléa Newman, in writing Heather Has Two Mommies, had helped bring one of society's sore spots to the fore. for the good and the bad. And like her, and around the time the conservative group in Oregon was forcing that referendum, another writer was toiling on a book that would be just as controversial.
You know, it was a long time ago. I'm trying to remember what year I wrote that book, probably 1992 or 93. So it's a little difficult to remember. But I had written many books before that, and I was aware that The Giver was somewhat different from my previous books, but I was not aware of, didn't perceive that it would cause any problems for people.
Lois Lowry is a multi-award-winning writer from Maine. She's written over 40 books, mostly for children, and like Lesléa, has not shied away from challenging topics. She's tackled racism, the Holocaust, terminal illness, depression, and in her book The Giver, she would tackle subjects that many would object to.
Some people found in it things that I had not been aware I was putting there. They took things out of context, but I didn't perceive that that was going to be a problem. And so after the book was published, and when I first became aware of difficulties, it took me by surprise. It's funny, I'm aware that we pronounce the word differently. We say controversy here, and you say controversy. Different syllable.
The Giver, published in 1993, portrays a world that at first sounds idyllic. There is no war, no hunger, only a list of rules one must follow to ensure harmony. All are assigned work, given partners, given children, and if you play your part right, you are rewarded with a peaceful existence. But when Jonas reaches 12 years old and is set his task in life, to be the receiver of memory, he starts to see the cracks in his society. A society with no free will, where the taking of medicine to eliminate sexual impulses is enforced, where the elders set out a path for your life to follow, where books are banned, knowledge strictly controlled, and he is to discover where the elderly, the weak and sick, the uncooperative, are euthanized.
It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. The needle-nosed single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adult as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused, for an explanation of the frightening event. All of the citizens had been ordered to go into the nearest building and stay there. Immediately, the rasping voice through the speaker had said, "Leave your bicycles where they are."
That was an extract from The Giver, published by HarperCollins. How were you made aware of the backlash, that things were going badly?
Oh, let me think. I suppose I was notified by my publisher. They tend to keep track of such things. Often when there's an objection to a book, the people bringing the objection will contact the publisher because they don't know how to reach the author personally. So I suppose it was brought to my attention by them. There was a website that called me the Antichrist. I believe that's disappeared from the internet now, but it was there for a while, and it was puzzling because it took things, it made misstatements, it took things out of context. I mean, very often it's people who have a particular agenda and just want to promote that. But it's kind of interesting to be called the Antichrist. One doesn't quite know how to respond to that one.
It was on the Life Enterprises Unlimited website that Eleanor Ramsey wrote the article in which she called Lois the Antichrist. In an article titled "Antichrist Teachings Infiltrate Parochial and Public Grammar Schools," she also said,
"Evils of the highest order are etched into the book."
And that The Giver was
in service to Lucifer.
On that same website, run by Catholic priest David Trosh, the priest himself wrote that the book was
written for mentally careless or untrained people, especially children, that can be easily led astray if the content does not bring attention to unresolvable problems.
At the time, it was something of a cause célèbre, but I was surprised by it. And in retrospect, I still am. I think people found in it things that corresponded to perhaps their particular agenda, but they certainly weren't things that I intended.
The Giver was and is so often challenged not because of sexuality or swearing, but rather because many feel it is violent or falls into the catch-all category of unsuitable for age group. Too disturbing, in other words. In 1994, the book was banned from schools in the Bonita Unified School District in Laverne and San Dimas, California, after a small group of concerned parents complained of violent and sexual content. In 1995, students required permission from their parents before reading the book in the Columbia Falls school system. In 1999, a superintendent in Union County, Florida, pulled the book from schools after mother Sandy Lane Avery asked the board,
"Why do we need a fictional book to teach our children things we are trying not to get them to get involved in?"
But enough parents disagreed that the board overturned the ban. In 2001, in Denver, Colorado, Mark Hansen pushed to get the book withdrawn from schools for kids in kindergarten through to 6th grade. In other words, kids aged 3 to 12. Though it must surely be doubtful that any kindergarten teacher was actually trying to read The Giver to youngsters. They'd have more luck with Heather Has Two Mommies. Hansen himself had an 11-year-old daughter who, after having heard the book read in class, told her father about a scene in which a twin, lighter in weight than its sibling, is euthanized. Hansen read the book himself and was not best pleased, as he related to the school board.
In a state with the nation's 5th highest suicide rate, and in the same state school district as Columbine High School, a lot has changed in our community, and some things should be re-evaluated.
Mr. Hansen's attempts were unsuccessful. In Iowa in 2005, 2 parents complained after their son was left upset by the book's discussion of death. The book was removed from the district schools. That same year in Missouri, a group of 20 parents joined forces to have the book removed from their 8th grade reading list. They were unsuccessful too. In 2006, 2007, 2008, on and on. In fact, The Giver ranked 11th on the American Library Association's list of books most frequently requested for removal between 1990 and 1999. In the 2000 to 2009 list, the book is down 12 places to number 23. But still, as Slate reported in their 2014 article on the subject, the Office for Intellectual Freedom have logged over 11,000 challenges to The Giver since its publication. That number can only have gone up since then, especially when you consider that a movie based on the book, starring Jeff Bridges and Meryl Streep, was released that year by the Weinstein Company, reigniting interest in Lois Lowry's dystopian nightmare.
They're called books.
Hello? My name...
I know who you are.
Who are you?
The Giver. When the elders need guidance, I provide wisdom using memories of the past. Our world was different. There was more.
More?
Much more.
After spending so long working on a book, and then finally releasing it into the world, I wondered what it felt like when it was met with such a rocky reception. Lois told me this.
Most often, sometimes I felt amused when people were so crazy that it felt far removed from me. Sometimes I felt angry when it was clear that they were misquoting me. And sometimes I felt kind of sad because I felt that it did a disservice to my audience, who are young and vulnerable people. And it still to this day saddens me when people... I work very hard at what I do, and I'm very aware of who my readers are and that they're young. And so when somebody intrudes between me and them, it troubles me.
And like Lois, Lesléa also feels sadness for her readers. How did you actually feel when you started to find out all this crazy stuff?
I think I felt incredulous. I really couldn't believe that this was all happening. Sometimes I felt just a deep sadness, mostly for the children, because I was thinking, I'm an adult, I can handle this. But to think about a child getting this message that your family is horrible, and your family is going to hell, and all the things people said, I felt just really sad for the children, and, hoped, and I don't know if I want to say assumed, but I guess just hoped that children who have parents who are not considered mainstream, let's say, by others, had the support from their parents and other family members and friends and hopefully teachers and librarians and anyone else in their life to counter those messages and let them know that, of course, they are okay and their family is okay just the way they are.
And for all the organised protests, the letters, the objections, the news reports, the school board appeals, there were always some who cannot formulate their frustrations into legitimate channels.
But I will also add, having listed 3 adjectives, I said I was puzzled, perhaps, maybe that I was angry occasionally, that I was sad often. There was also one time when I was actually frightened by a person who wrote to me, an adult, not a child, and fortunately did so through the publisher, which made it clear that this person did not know where I lived. But and it was a he, his remarks and threats were so frightening that my brother, I told my brother about it. My brother was the one who went to the FBI. And they contacted me. And so there was a bit of conversation between me and the authorities, who felt ultimately that the man was probably not dangerous, but that nonetheless I should not appear publicly near where he lived, which was in another state, quite a distance from me. That was the only time I've actually been in that way concerned for my own safety. And that man was clearly deranged.
But you just can't keep a good writer down.
Well, I'm a writer. That's what I do. Heather was not my first book. Actually, it was my first children's book, but I also write literature for adults. And I write about LGBTQ topics. I write about Jewish topics. I write about animals. I write about things that I feel passionate about. And I just have the kind of personality that this is not going to stop me. If anything, it's going to make me more determined to write books that will make the world a safer place for all kinds of children and all kinds of families.
So the Giver's got the pill popping, the lethal injections, the police state. Many people, having gone through what you've gone through, especially with the FBI ordeal, would have backed off. But then you wrote, I know a few years later, you wrote Son, in which you've got teenage pregnancy, you've got killings again. Do you feel you have a duty to the idea to just do it, or is it you just will not allow?
Well, I guess I feel as though my first commitment is to my work and to my audience. And these things that happen on the side, though they may be a distraction from time to time, I don't let them get in the way of what I try to do overall. And also I should add that I hear so often, The Giver was published in whenever, so it's been many, many years. And I still every day get letters or emails now from kids who are passionate about that book and are affected by that book. And that's, I think, what motivates me.
So perhaps controversy, as pointless and hurtful and loud and messy as it can be, can at least shine a light on topics, force them into people's minds, force them to discuss and think. After all, like in The Giver itself, if the people are shielded from the truths of the world, what kind of world would it be? So sometimes a good controversy is like a light in the dark, highlighting things we may otherwise not see, or wish to see. As this Associated Press article from 1998 shows us, attempts to block the truth can backfire on you.
After protest by pastor, interest in gay books at library grows. Instead of ridding public library shelves of Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate, a Baptist minister's protest has put more copies in circulation. The minister, Robert Jeffress, pastor of the 4,400-member First Baptist Church, was surprised when he learned that the Wichita Falls Library was lending the books about children with gay parents. When a church member checked out the books and brought them to Mr. Jeffress, he wrote a cheque for $54 to the library after vowing never to return them. But so many people wanted to read the books, after an article about the situation appeared in the Wichita Falls Times Record News, that the library's administrator, Linda Hughes, is applying library rules intended to limit how long patrons must wait. The policy calls for obtaining more copies when 6 or more people are waiting for a book. "We have 10 holds on each one of these books," Miss Hughes said on Thursday. "We're past the point which we would have to buy more copies." Sympathetic book lovers had donated 15 copies by late this week, Miss Hughes said. "I've been getting them in the mail and through the Dropbox," she said. "Most of them are brand new."
It was I think the 10th most banned book, or on the American Library Association's list of challenged books in the 1990s. So it went on for at least a decade. And, there's still little pockets where it bubbles up. I mean, not like it did back then. And I did just publish a book last year called Sparkle Boy, about a little boy named Casey who likes sparkly skirts and nail polish just like his big sister. And that was received very enthusiastically without really any challenges that I'm aware of. So I think things have changed, and even though I feel like we are in a time of some really extreme backlash, that we will continue to make forward progress towards acceptance and celebration and respect for diversity and celebration for all.
Did it change you at all to be part of that thunderstorm?
Well, I have always thought of myself as a writer. Publishing Heather Has Two Mommies forced me into the role of political activist, which I'm very grateful for. I think it made me stronger, because if I wasn't going to stand up and defend my own book, who would? So I think it's made me a better person, because it's strengthened my belief in many things, but including something called tikkun olam, which is a Jewish phrase which means repairing the world. And every Jew at birth is assigned the task of tikkun olam, and it is up to you to figure out how you are going to repair the world, with the understanding that you can't do it alone and it will not happen in your lifetime, but you are still responsible for doing your part.
I think if a book doesn't stir up strong feelings one way or another, the book probably hasn't said anything very much. I think the fact that a reader responds passionately one way or another means that the book has spoken to them in some way. And of course, that's what I try to do. I'm saddened, as I've said, when the reaction is negative. But nonetheless, I'm always heartened by the fact that there is a reaction, that people are reading and that they're thinking about and reacting to what they're reading. That's what literature is for, after all. The threats and the crazy people have backed off over the years, so I'm not any longer very troubled by them.
Do you think it was a small minority of very vocal people, like an echo chamber? Do you think it was actually quite a small margin who would feel that way or behave that way?
Well, I would like to think that, but I think, as you probably know, I live in a country that is deeply, deeply divided. And I am really hoping, there was a point in time not too long ago when it seemed like we were making a lot of progress. We had a very different administration at that time. And now we're kind of sliding back a bit. But I am hoping that, though it sounds trite, that love conquers all. And I think that loving families like Heather's will win out in the end.
So the takeaway for me, having heard about what Lesléa and Lois went through, is that we need people like that. People willing to go out on a limb and present alternative ways of life, alternative ideas. We need people to provoke some controversy sometimes, show the world how other people live. because how else are we to talk about these things? How else are we to hear other people's points of view? And if we don't hear other points of view, then we're living in the shadows. Whatever your point of view is, there'll be someone who has the opposite. But as long as we can talk about it and hear about it without defecating on each other's opinions, literally in some cases, the world will be a better place. At least we'll always know we are never alone. And the real takeaway for me is that for every one person who was defecating on a book in a library, there were then plenty more who put hands in pockets to buy more copies of that book to help spread the word. So, for all the bad news we hear in the world, just remember there's lots of good we just don't hear about. So maybe these books had a happy ending after all. Outrage, Outrage, Outrage featured interviews with Lesléa Newman and Lois Lowry. Thank you to both of them for agreeing to be part of this, and I'll let Lesléa herself tell us about her next project.
I have a new book coming out in February called Gittle's Journey, an Ellis Island story, which is about a little girl who comes from the old country, as my grandmother called it, to America by herself on a big ship at the turn of the 20th century.
And her most recent kids' book, Sparkle Boy, a story about acceptance and the right to be yourself, is available now. So get onto her website and get onto Amazon to look for those. And the same goes for Lois. Check out her website, loislowry.com. And all her books are available on Amazon, including The Giver and its 3 sequels, Gathering Blue, Messenger and Son, not to mention her range of Anastasia books, Sam Krupnick books, the Tate family books, and her own autobiography, Looking Back. The voices of concerned parents Sandy Lane and Mark Hansen were provided by actors. And speaking of actors, the voice actors were Marion Newman, Ruth Tinsley, Ed Feather, Robert Taylor, and Maya Smith. And it was written and produced by me, Andy Smith.